6 months after that life-changing night at Giuseppe's restaurant, Lucy stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. The elegant black gown she wore had been specially designed for this performance, and her hair was styled in a way that made her look sophisticated and confident. But despite her polished appearance, she felt the same nervous excitement she had experienced as a little girl before her first school recital. Tonight was the culmination of everything that had happened since her story went viral. The benefit concert, titled Finding Hope, a Night of Music for Homeless Youth, had been organized to raise money and awareness for young people living on the streets. Lucy was the featured performer, but she would be sharing the stage with other young artists who had been discovered and supported through programs inspired by her story. The months at Manhattan School of Music had been transformative. Lucy had thrown herself into her studies with the determination of someone who knew how precious these opportunities were. Her professors were amazed at her progress and her dedication. She practiced for hours every day, not because she had to, but because music had become her way of processing everything that had happened to her and everything she hoped to achieve. "You've grown not just as a musician, but as an artist," her main teacher, Dr. Peterson, had told her during their last lesson before the concert. "Your technical skills were always impressive, but now you're learning to use music to tell stories and connect with people on a deeper level." Lucy had also become something of a spokesperson for homeless youth, speaking at conferences and fundraising events about the importance of supporting young people who had aged out of foster care. She had testified before the city council about the need for better programs and had helped launch several initiatives that provided artistic opportunities for kids living on the streets. The Lucy Foundation, which had been started in her honor, was now operating in 12 cities and had helped over 200 young people access arts education and support services. Lucy served on the Foundation's Youth Advisory Board, helping to ensure that the programs they developed actually met the needs of the kids they were trying to help. "The most important thing," Lucy had said during a recent interview, "is remembering that homeless youth aren't just statistics or problems to be solved. We're individuals with dreams and talents and stories that matter. Sometimes all someone needs is a chance to show what they're capable of." Tonight's concert was being live-streamed around the world, with donations flowing in through a special website that had been set up for the event. But for Lucy, the most meaningful part wasn't the money being raised or the famous people in the audience. It was the group of young artists who would be performing alongside her, kids who had been discovered through programs modeled after her own experience. There was Kevin, a 17-year-old from Detroit, who had been living in his car when a social worker heard him singing at a homeless shelter. He had an incredible voice and was now studying at a performing arts high school, while living with a foster family who understood his musical ambitions. Maria, 19, from Los Angeles, had been writing poetry on scraps of paper she found in dumpsters. A volunteer at a youth center had read her work and helped her get connected with spoken word artists who were now mentoring her. She would be performing one of her poems as part of tonight's show, and Alex, whom Lucy had met at Harbor House, would be displaying some of his artwork in the Carnegie Hall lobby. His paintings, which depicted the experience of homelessness with both brutal honesty and surprising beauty, had been featured in several galleries and had helped change how people thought about the artistic potential of homeless youth. As Lucy waited in the wings, she could hear the audience settling into their seats. She knew that many of the people who had been part of her journey were out there. Mrs. Chen was in the front row, beaming with pride. Professor Williams had flown in from Chicago, along with Tony from Giuseppe's restaurant and several of the customers who had been there that first night. Jennifer, the reporter who had first shared Lucy's story, was covering the event for her network. Ms. Patterson from DCFS was also in the audience, along with Rachel Torres and several other people who had become Lucy's mentors and advocates. But perhaps most importantly to Lucy, there were dozens of current and former homeless youth in the audience, many of whom had received scholarships to attend the concert. Dr. Richardson from Manhattan School of Music stepped onto the stage to introduce the evening. 6 months ago, a young woman walked into a restaurant in Chicago, hungry and hoping for a meal. Instead, she gave the world something much more valuable, a reminder that talent and dignity can flourish even in the most difficult circumstances. Tonight, Lucy and the other artists you'll meet are giving us something even more precious: hope for the future. The curtain rose, and Lucy walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience was on its feet before she had even reached the piano, and she had to pause for several moments until the clapping died down. She looked out at the sea of faces, many of them familiar, many of them strangers who had been moved by her story. "Thank you," she said into the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I was cold, hungry, and convinced that no one in the world cared whether I lived or died. I learned that night that I was wrong about a lot of things." She sat down at the piano bench and continued speaking. "I was wrong about music being something that could be taken away from me. I was wrong about people not caring about kids like me, and I was wrong about my story being over. Tonight isn't just about me, or even about the amazing young artists you'll meet during this concert. It's about all the kids who are out there, right now, sleeping in doorways and subway stations, convinced that no one sees them or values what they have to offer." Lucy placed her hands on the keys. "This first piece is the same Chopin nocturne I played that night at Giuseppe's restaurant. But tonight, I'm not playing it as someone asking for help. I'm playing it as someone who has received more love and support than I ever dreamed possible, and I'm dedicating it to every young person who is still waiting for their chance to be heard." The opening notes filled the concert hall, and Lucy felt the same sense of connection to the music that she had experienced that first night. But this time, the feeling was deeper and richer, informed by everything she had learned and experienced over the past 6 months. The melody soared through the hall, carrying with it all the pain and hope and determination that had brought her to this moment. As she played, Lucy thought about her mother, who had always believed that music could change the world one person at a time. She thought about Mrs. Chen, who had opened her home and her heart to a broken teenager she barely knew. She thought about Professor Williams, who had seen potential in her when she couldn't see it in herself. But mostly, she thought about all the young people who were still out there, still struggling, still believing that no one cared about their dreams. Through her music, she tried to send them a message. You matter. Your story matters. Your dreams matter. And someday, if you don't give up, you might find yourself exactly where you're supposed to be. When the nocturne ended, the silence lasted for several heartbeats before the audience erupted in applause. Lucy smiled and began her second piece, an original composition she had written called Finding Home. It was a musical journey that started with uncertainty and fear, but gradually built to hope and joy, telling the story of her own transformation through melody and harmony. The rest of the concert featured the other young artists, each sharing their own gifts and their own stories of overcoming incredible obstacles. Kevin's voice brought the audience to tears with his rendition of Amazing Grace. Maria's poetry was so powerful that several people in the audience were moved to start their own foundations for young writers. Alex's art, displayed on screens throughout the hall, showed the world what homelessness looked like through the eyes of someone who had lived it. As the evening drew to a close, all the young artists joined Lucy on stage for a final song. They had chosen What a Wonderful World, not because their world had always been wonderful, but because they had learned to see the wonder that existed even in the darkest moments. Sometimes, Lucy said as the concert ended, the most beautiful music comes from the most difficult places. Thank you for listening to our stories, and thank you for believing that every young person deserves a chance to share their gifts with the world. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. As Lucy finally left the stage, she was surrounded by reporters, well-wishers, and other young people who wanted to thank her for giving them hope. But the moment that meant the most came when a 15-year-old girl approached her with tears in her eyes. "I saw your first video 6 months ago," the girl said. "I was living in my car and thinking about giving up on everything. But watching you play that night made me realize that my story wasn't over either. I just got accepted to art school with a full scholarship." Lucy hugged the girl tightly, remembering what it felt like to believe that no one cared about her future. "Your story is just beginning," she whispered. The wind cut through downtown Chicago like a knife, and 16-year-old Lucy pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. Snow had been falling for hours, turning the busy streets into a winter wonderland that looked beautiful, but felt cruel when you had nowhere warm to go. Her stomach made angry noises, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning when she found half a sandwich in a dumpster behind a coffee shop. Lucy's fingers were numb from the cold as she reached into her pocket and felt around for the crumpled $5 bill she'd found earlier that day. Someone had dropped it near the subway entrance, and after waiting 20 minutes to see if anyone would come back for it, she'd picked it up. $5 wasn't much, but it was enough for something hot to eat. She walked past several fast food places, their bright lights and warm air calling to her every time someone opened a door. But Lucy had learned to be careful about where she went. Some places were kind to people like her and others weren't. She'd been kicked out of enough restaurants to know the difference, and tonight she was tired of being treated like she didn't belong anywhere. That's when she saw it. Giuseppe's Italian restaurant sat on the corner like a glowing jewel, with soft yellow lights in the windows and the kind of warmth that seemed to spill out onto the sidewalk. Through the large windows, she could see families sitting around tables covered with white cloths, laughing and sharing plates of food that looked like they came from cooking shows. Lucy hesitated for a moment. This place looked expensive, way more expensive than anything she could afford with $5. But she was so cold and so hungry that she decided to try anyway. Maybe they had soup or bread or something small she could buy. The heavy wooden door felt warm under her hand as she pushed it open. A wave of heated air hit her face, carrying the smell of garlic, tomatoes, and fresh bread. For a second, she just stood there breathing it in, remembering what it felt like to be somewhere safe and warm. The restaurant was busy but not packed. Couples sat at small tables by the windows, and families filled the larger booths along the walls. Everyone looked clean and well-dressed, wearing the kind of clothes Lucy used to wear before her life turned upside down. She suddenly felt very aware of her dirty jeans, her worn-out sneakers with holes in the toes, and her jacket that had seen better days months ago. A woman in a black dress approached her from behind a tall wooden stand. She had perfectly styled hair and makeup that looked like it had been done in a salon. Her smile was bright and professional, but it flickered when she looked Lucy up and down. "Can I help you?" the hostess asked, her voice friendly but cautious. "Hi," Lucy said, trying to sound confident. "Could I get a table for one?" "I was hoping to get something to eat." The hostess looked around the restaurant, then back at Lucy. Her professional smile was still there, but something had changed in her eyes. "I'm sorry, but we have a dress code here. All our guests need to be appropriately dressed for dining." Lucy felt her cheeks get hot. "I have money," she said quietly, pulling out the $5 bill. "I know it's not much, but maybe I could just get some bread or soup." "I'm really sorry, but our entrees start at $28, the hostess said, not unkindly but firmly. "And we do require proper attire. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the casual dining establishments down the street." Other customers had started to notice the conversation. Lucy could feel their eyes on her, and she heard someone whisper something to their dinner companion. A man in an expensive suit looked over and frowned as if Lucy's presence was somehow ruining his meal. "Please," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm really hungry and it's so cold outside. Isn't there anything I could afford?" The hostess looked genuinely uncomfortable now. She glanced toward the back of the restaurant, and Lucy saw her make a small gesture with her hand. Within moments, a security guard appeared. He was a big man in a dark uniform, and he walked over with the kind of authority that made it clear this conversation was over. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the security guard said. His voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't particularly kind either. "This is a private establishment, and we reserve the right to refuse service." Lucy felt tears start to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd learned not to cry in public, because it only made people more uncomfortable around her. Instead, she nodded and turned toward the door, her $5 still clutched in her hand. But as she walked toward the exit, something caught her eye. In a corner of the restaurant, away from most of the dining tables, sat a beautiful black piano. It was a grand piano, the kind she used to play at school concerts and recitals. The lid was open and she could see the white and black keys gleaming under a small spotlight. Lucy stopped walking. She stared at the piano and suddenly she wasn't in the restaurant anymore. She was back in her old music teacher's studio, with Mrs. Chen showing her how to make her fingers dance across the keys. She was 8 years old again, playing for her mom after school, filling their small apartment with music that made everything feel okay. "Miss," the security guard said again, touching her shoulder gently. "You need to leave now." Lucy looked up at him, then back at the piano. She made a decision that would change everything. Instead of walking toward the door, she walked toward the piano. The security guard called after her, but she didn't stop. Other customers turned to watch as this homeless girl in dirty clothes approached the beautiful instrument that usually only played soft background music during dinner service. "Hey," the hostess called out, her professional composure finally cracking. "You can't just—" But Lucy was already sitting on the piano bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment, and in that pause, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing to see what would happen next. Then Lucy began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air, and everything changed. The melody was soft and sad and beautiful, played with the kind of skill that takes years to develop. Lucy's fingers moved across the keys like they belonged there, like this piano had been waiting for her all along. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hung in the air halfway to mouths. The security guard, who had been reaching for Lucy's shoulder, let his hand drop to his side. Even the hostess, who moments before had been ready to call the police, stood frozen with her mouth slightly open. The music seemed to transform the restaurant. What had been a place of rejection and judgment became something else entirely. Lucy played with her eyes closed, lost in the melody that had been locked inside her for months, waiting for the right moment to come out. She didn't think about the cold or her hunger or the faces staring at her. For the first time in a very long time, she was exactly where she belonged. The security guard's hand stopped just inches from Lucy's shoulder. He had been trained to remove troublemakers quickly and quietly, but this wasn't trouble. This was something he'd never heard before, not in all his years working at fancy restaurants and hotels. The melody flowing from the piano was so pure and beautiful that it made him think of his grandmother, who used to hum old songs while she cooked Sunday dinner. The hostess stood behind her wooden stand, completely forgetting about the waiting customers who had been checking in for their reservations. She had worked at Giuseppe's for 3 years and had heard the piano played hundreds of times. Usually it was just soft background music during dinner service, pleasant but forgettable. This was different. This was the kind of music that made you stop everything else and just listen. Lucy's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young and obviously struggling. Each note was perfectly placed, building on the one before it to create something magical. The Chopin piece she had chosen was technically difficult, the kind of music that even trained pianists found challenging. But Lucy played it like she was telling a story, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, completely lost in the music. An older man at a nearby table slowly put down his wine glass. He had been a music teacher for 40 years before retiring, and he knew talent when he heard it. This wasn't just someone who had taken a few piano lessons. This was the kind of raw skill that music schools spent years trying to develop in their students. He leaned forward in his chair, studying the girl's technique, trying to understand how someone living on the streets could play with such incredible precision. The kitchen door swung open, and one of the chefs peeked out to see what had caused the dining room to go so quiet. He saw the homeless girl at the piano, and was about to march over and remove her himself when the music hit him. He had grown up in Italy, where music was as important as food, and his mother had played piano in their small village church. He recognized the piece immediately and knew how difficult it was to play well. Instead of interrupting, he quietly signaled to the other kitchen staff to come listen. Lucy transitioned seamlessly from the Chopin piece into something else, something even more beautiful. The new melody was gentler, more haunting, like moonlight on water. It was Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that required not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding. As she played, Lucy seemed to forget where she was entirely. She forgot about the restaurant, the staring people, her empty stomach, and her cold feet. There was only the music and the way it made her feel alive again. A woman at a corner table began to cry softly. She didn't know why the music affected her so deeply, but it reminded her of something precious she had lost long ago. Her husband reached across and took her hand, and they sat there together, listening to this unexpected gift that had walked into their evening uninvited. More people had gathered by the windows outside. Passers-by had stopped when they heard the piano music drifting out onto the street. and now they pressed against the glass to see where such beautiful sound was coming from. They saw the girl in worn clothes sitting at the grand piano, and most of them assumed she was some kind of special entertainment the restaurant had hired for the evening. The restaurant manager, Tony, emerged from his office where he had been reviewing inventory reports. He had heard the music and assumed their regular piano player had come in early for the evening shift. When he saw Lucy instead, his first instinct was anger. How had a homeless girl gotten past his staff and made it to the piano? But as he listened to her play, his anger melted away into something like wonder. Tony had owned restaurants for 25 years, and he had hired many piano players over the years. Some were technically skilled but boring. Others were enthusiastic but sloppy. This girl was neither. She played with a combination of technical perfection and emotional depth that he had rarely encountered, even in professional musicians who charged hundreds of dollars for a single performance. Lucy's fingers found the final notes of Claire de Lune, letting them hang in the air like a gentle goodbye. For a moment, the restaurant was completely silent. Then slowly, someone began to clap. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire restaurant was applauding. But Lucy didn't hear the applause at first. She sat at the piano with her eyes still closed, her hands resting in her lap, trying to hold on to the feeling of the music for just a few seconds longer. When she finally opened her eyes and saw all the faces looking at her, reality came rushing back. She was still hungry, still cold, still homeless, and still very much not supposed to be here. The security guard approached her again, but this time his steps were slower, more uncertain. The whole situation had changed, and he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do anymore. How do you throw out someone who had just given everyone in the room such an incredible gift? That was beautiful, he said quietly when he reached the piano. Really beautiful. But I still need to ask you to leave. I'm sorry. Lucy nodded and started to stand up, but before she could move away from the piano, the older man who had been a music teacher appeared beside her. He was tall and distinguished with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Wait, he said, looking first at Lucy, then at the security guard. Please just wait a moment. He turned back to Lucy. Where did you learn to play like that? Lucy looked down at her hands, suddenly shy again. All the confidence she had felt while playing seemed to evaporate under the weight of everyone's attention. I used to take lessons, she said softly. Before what? The man asked gently. Lucy hesitated. She had learned to be careful about sharing her story. Most people didn't really want to know the details of how someone ended up living on the streets. They just wanted to feel good about themselves for asking. But something about this man seemed different. Maybe it was the way he had listened to her music, or the genuine kindness in his voice, or maybe she was just tired of carrying her story alone. Before my mom died, she said so quietly that the man had to lean closer to hear her. Before everything changed. The restaurant had grown quiet again, with people straining to hear this conversation. Lucy realized that her story was becoming entertainment for these well-dressed diners, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. But the old music teacher seemed to understand. He stepped slightly closer, creating a small bubble of privacy around them. What's your name? He asked. Lucy, I'm Professor Williams. I taught music for 40 years, and I can tell you that what you just played was extraordinary. That kind of talent doesn't just disappear because life gets hard. He paused, studying her face. Are you hungry? Lucy nodded, not trusting her voice. Tony? Professor Williams called to the manager, who was still standing nearby, looking uncertain about the whole situation. Could we get this young lady something to eat? I'll pay for it. The manager looked around at his dining room full of customers who were all watching this scene unfold. Every face was turned toward them, waiting to see what would happen next. Some looked curious, some looked moved by what they had heard, and a few looked uncomfortable with the disruption to their expensive evening out. Tony made a decision that surprised even himself. Of course, he said. Lucy, would you like to sit down and have some dinner? As our guest. As Tony led Lucy to a small table near the piano, something unexpected was happening outside. The beautiful music had carried through the restaurant's windows and out onto the busy Chicago street, where it mixed with the sounds of traffic and wind. But unlike the usual city noise that people learned to ignore, this music made people stop and listen. A woman walking her dog had paused first, tilting her head to figure out where such beautiful piano music was coming from. Then a couple hurrying to catch a bus slowed their steps, drawn by the haunting melody. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, their breath making white clouds in the cold air as they pressed closer to the windows. Inside the restaurant, Lucy sat at the table Professor Williams had chosen for her, still hardly believing what was happening. The white tablecloth felt strange under her hands after months of eating off paper plates and sometimes no plates at all. Tony had brought her a menu, but the words seemed to blur together. Everything felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. "Order anything you want," Professor Williams said gently, sitting across from her. "And please don't worry about the price." Lucy looked down at the menu, overwhelmed by all the choices. She had been thinking about food constantly for weeks, but now that she could actually order something, she couldn't decide. Everything sounded wonderful, and everything sounded like more than she deserved. While she studied the menu, more people were gathering outside. Someone had pulled out their phone and was recording through the window, trying to capture video of the girl who had played so beautifully. The video was shaky and the sound wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to show something special was happening. A teenage boy walking past with his friends stopped when he heard the music. He had been studying piano for 6 years and knew how difficult the pieces Lucy had played really were. "Guys, listen to this," he told his friends, pulling out his phone to start recording. "This is insane. That girl is incredible." Inside, Lucy finally decided on minestrone soup and bread. It seemed like a safe choice, and her stomach was practically growling at the thought of warm soup. When the waitress brought it to her table, Lucy had to stop herself from eating too quickly. The soup was rich and full of vegetables, and the bread was soft and warm. It was the best thing she had tasted in months. But even as she ate, Lucy was aware of all the attention she was getting. People kept looking over at her table, and she could hear whispered conversations. Some people seemed curious and kind, but others looked uncomfortable, as if they didn't think someone like her belonged in their restaurant. Professor Williams seemed to notice her discomfort. "It's hard being the center of attention, isn't it?" he said softly. Lucy nodded, taking another spoonful of soup. "I just wanted something to eat," she said. "I didn't mean to cause all this trouble." "Trouble?" Professor Williams looked surprised. "Lucy, what you just did wasn't trouble. It was a gift. Did you see how everyone reacted to your music?" "They were staring at me because I don't belong here," Lucy said, looking down at her worn clothes. "They were staring because you created something beautiful," he corrected her. "Music has the power to bring people together, to make them feel things they forgot they could feel. That's what you did tonight." Outside, the crowd was growing larger. Word was spreading through social media as people posted videos and told their friends about the homeless girl with the incredible talent. A local news reporter who had been covering a story nearby got a tip about what was happening and decided to investigate. She arrived with a camera crew just as Lucy finished her soup. The reporter, Jennifer, had covered hundreds of human interest stories over the years, but something about this one felt different. She watched through the window as Lucy sat at the table, looking small and uncertain despite the extraordinary talent she had just displayed. There was a story here, Jennifer could sense it, but she also knew she needed to be careful. This was a young person in a vulnerable situation, not just another news story. Inside the restaurant, Tony was dealing with an unexpected problem. The crowd outside was getting bigger, and more people were trying to come into the restaurant just to see Lucy. Some were genuinely moved by her story and wanted to help, but others seemed to treat the whole thing like entertainment. He had to post one of his staff members at the door to manage the situation. "This is getting out of hand," the hostess said to Tony as she watched more people gather outside. "Maybe we should ask her to leave before this becomes a circus." But Tony was thinking about his own daughter, who was about Lucy's age. What if she had been the one out there in the cold, hungry, and alone? Would he want someone to turn her away because her presence was inconvenient? "No," he said firmly. "She stays as long as she wants to stay, and anyone who has a problem with that can eat somewhere else." Lucy finished her soup and felt more human than she had in weeks. The warm food in her stomach and the heated restaurant air were making her drowsy, but in a good way. For the first time in months, she felt safe enough to relax, even just a little bit. Professor Williams had been watching her carefully, and he could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. "Lucy, can I ask you something? Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" Lucy hesitated, then shook her head. She had been sleeping in a different place every night, moving around to avoid trouble. Sometimes she found an unlocked building or a warm subway station, but more often she just found doorways and park benches. I know someone who runs a shelter for young people, Professor Williams said carefully. It's not like the big city shelters. It's smaller, safer. Would you be interested in talking to them? Before Lucy could answer, Jennifer the reporter approached their table. She had managed to get past Tony's staff member by explaining that she just wanted to talk, not film anything without permission. Excuse me, Jennifer said politely. I'm Jennifer Chen from Channel 7 News. I heard about what happened here tonight, and I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes. Lucy looked panicked. She had grown up watching the news with her mother, and she knew that being on TV usually meant something bad had happened to you. I didn't do anything wrong, she said quickly. Oh no, you absolutely didn't, Jennifer said, sitting down carefully in the chair next to Professor Williams. Actually, what you did was amazing. I've never heard piano playing like that, especially not from someone so young. I was hoping you might be willing to share your story. Why? Lucy asked suspiciously. Jennifer thought about how to answer that question honestly. Because I think there are people out there who would want to help you if they knew about your situation. And because your talent is so extraordinary that it deserves to be recognized. Lucy looked at Professor Williams, who nodded encouragingly. It's up to you, he said. But Jennifer's right. There are people who would want to help if they knew how. Outside, the crowd had grown to nearly 50 people. Some were still recording with their phones. Others were just listening and watching through the windows. A few had started sharing their videos on social media with captions like "Homeless girl plays piano better than most professionals" and "You won't believe what happened at this restaurant tonight." The videos were starting to get attention. People were sharing them with friends, commenting about how moved they were by Lucy's story and her incredible talent. Some were already asking how they could help, while others were debating whether the videos were real or staged. Lucy took a deep breath and looked at Jennifer. If I talk to you, will it help other kids like me? I hope so, Jennifer said honestly. I can't promise anything specific, but sometimes when people hear stories like yours, it makes them want to do something to help. Lucy nodded slowly. Okay, but can we do it somewhere else? All these people staring at me is making me nervous. Tony overheard the conversation and stepped forward. You can use my office in the back, he offered. It's private and no one will bother you there. As they prepared to move to Tony's office, Lucy looked back at the piano one more time. A few hours ago, she had been just another homeless kid that people walked past without seeing. Now somehow everything had changed. She wasn't sure if it was for better or worse yet, but she knew that her life would never be the same again. The piano sat silent now, its keys reflecting the restaurant lights, but Lucy could still feel the music inside her, waiting for the next chance to come out and remind the world that beauty could be found in the most unexpected places. In Tony's small office behind the kitchen, Lucy sat in a comfortable chair for the first time in months. The office was warm and quiet, with family photos on the desk and the comforting smell of garlic and herbs drifting in from the kitchen. Jennifer had set up her camera on a small tripod, but she kept it at a distance so Lucy wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Just talk to me like we're having a conversation, Jennifer said gently. Forget about the camera. Tell me about yourself, Lucy. Where are you from? Lucy fidgeted with the hem of her jacket, still not quite believing this was really happening. I grew up here in Chicago, she said quietly, in a little apartment on the north side with my mom. It was just the two of us. What was that like? Jennifer asked. A small smile crossed Lucy's face for the first time that evening. It was good. My mom worked really hard. She had 2 jobs, but she always made time for me. She used to say that music was the one thing nobody could ever take away from us, no matter what happened. Is that how you started playing piano? My mom saved up for months to buy me an old keyboard when I was 7, Lucy said, her voice getting stronger as she talked about happier times. It was second-hand and some of the keys stuck, but I loved it. I taught myself to play by watching videos online and playing along with songs on the radio. Professor Williams, who had been listening quietly from a corner chair, leaned forward. Lucy, the pieces you played tonight aren't beginner songs. Someone taught you proper technique. Lucy nodded. When I was 9, my music teacher at school heard me playing during recess. Mrs. Rodriguez said I had natural talent and helped me apply for a scholarship program. They gave me real piano lessons and let me practice on a real piano after school. What was that like? Jennifer asked. It was like magic, Lucy said, her eyes lighting up at the memory. I had never touched a real piano before, and when I sat down and played that first chord, I felt like I was home. Mrs. Rodriguez said I learned faster than any student she'd ever had. Within a year, I was playing pieces that took most kids 3 or 4 years to learn. Jennifer could see how much music meant to Lucy, which made what came next all the more heartbreaking. What happened to change all that? Lucy's smile faded, and she looked down at her hands. My mom got sick. At first, we thought it was just the flu, but it kept getting worse. She was too tired to work, and we started falling behind on rent and bills. She didn't want to tell me how bad things were, but I could see her getting thinner and weaker. Did she see a doctor? She tried, but we didn't have good insurance. The free clinic was always crowded, and they kept telling her to rest and drink fluids. By the time they figured out she had pneumonia, it was really bad. Lucy's voice got quieter. She went to the hospital on a Tuesday, and by Friday she was gone. The room was silent except for the distant sounds of the restaurant. Jennifer had covered many sad stories, but there was something about Lucy's quiet dignity that made this one particularly difficult to hear. I'm so sorry, Jennifer said softly. What happened after that? I didn't have any other family, Lucy continued. My mom's parents died when I was little, and my dad left before I was born. Child Services put me in a temporary foster home while they tried to figure out what to do with me. How was the foster home? Lucy shrugged. It wasn't bad exactly. The family was nice enough, but they already had 3 kids of their own. I was just another mouth to feed, you know? And there was no piano. I asked if I could keep going to my lessons, but they said it was too expensive and too complicated. Professor Williams shook his head sadly. He had seen too many talented young musicians lose their way because they couldn't afford lessons or access to instruments. The plan was for me to stay there until they found a permanent placement, Lucy continued. But that took months, and while I was waiting, I turned 17. In Illinois, you age out of the foster care system at 18, and since I was so close to that birthday, most families didn't want to take me in. Why invest in a kid who would be gone in a few months anyway? So what did you do? I tried to make it work, Lucy said. The state gave me a little apartment through a program for kids aging out of care. It was tiny and not in a great neighborhood, but it was mine. I got a job at a fast food place and enrolled myself in the local high school. Jennifer could see where this story was heading, but she let Lucy tell it in her own way. For a while, it was okay. I missed my mom every day and I missed playing piano, but I thought I could build a new life. Then the funding for my apartment program got cut. They said there wasn't enough money to help all the kids who needed it, so they had to prioritize the younger ones. How long ago was this? About 8 months ago. I tried to keep my job and finish school while sleeping in shelters, but it's really hard to do homework when you don't know where you're going to sleep. And I kept getting sick because the shelters are crowded and not very clean. Eventually, I missed too many days of work and got fired. Lucy paused, gathering strength to finish her story. Once I lost my job, I couldn't afford the shelter fees anymore. That's when I ended up on the streets. Have you been homeless this whole time? Yeah. I've learned which places are safe to sleep, where I can clean up, which restaurants throw away food that's still good. You figure out how to survive. Professor Williams couldn't stay quiet anymore. Lucy, have you been completely cut off from music all this time? Mostly. Sometimes I find old pianos in churches or community centers, and if no one's around, I play for a few minutes. There's a piano at the train station downtown, and late at night when it's quiet, I sit there and play. But it's not the same when you have to worry about getting in trouble or being told to leave. Is that why you came to the restaurant tonight? Jennifer asked. Lucy nodded. I saw the piano through the window, and I missed music so much. I know it was stupid to think they'd let me eat here, but I was so cold and hungry, and seeing that piano made me remember what it felt like to be somewhere I belonged. And when they told you to leave? I was going to go, I really was. But I walked past the piano and it was like seeing an old friend. I couldn't just walk away without saying goodbye. Jennifer wiped away a tear she didn't realize had formed. Lucy, what you played tonight was incredible. How did you remember those pieces after so long without practice? Music isn't something you forget, Lucy said simply. My mom used to say that once a song gets into your heart, it stays there forever. Even when I couldn't play, I would run through pieces in my head. Sometimes when I was cold or scared, I would imagine my fingers on the keys, playing something beautiful. Professor Williams leaned forward again. Lucy, I meant what I said earlier about your talent being extraordinary. I've taught hundreds of students over the years, and most of them had every advantage you can imagine. Private lessons, expensive instruments, supportive families, but very few of them had what you have. What do you mean? You don't just play music, Lucy. You understand it. You feel it. That's something that can't be taught, only nurtured. And despite everything you've been through, that gift is still there, stronger than ever. Lucy looked skeptical. What good does it do me now? I can't eat musical talent, and I can't find an apartment with it. Maybe not directly, Jennifer said. But Lucy, people need to know your story. Not just the sad parts, but the beautiful parts too. What you did tonight reminded everyone in that restaurant that there's more to a person than what they look like on the outside. As if to prove Jennifer's point, Tony knocked softly on the office door and peered in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are more people outside wanting to help, and someone's been trying to call the restaurant. They said they saw a video online and want to talk to Lucy. Jennifer looked at Lucy. Are you ready for this? Because I think your life is about to change in ways you never imagined. Lucy took a deep breath and thought about her mother, who had always told her that music could open doors she didn't even know existed. I guess we'll find out, she said. Outside Tony's office, the restaurant was buzzing with an energy that had nothing to do with the dinner service. Lucy's impromptu concert had created something bigger than anyone expected, and the ripples were just beginning to spread. While Lucy was sharing her story in Tony's office, something remarkable was happening online. The videos that people had recorded through the restaurant windows were spreading across social media, faster than anyone could have imagined. It started with a few posts on Instagram and Facebook, but within an hour, the videos had been shared hundreds of times. The first video to really take off was posted by Ashley, a college student who had been walking past the restaurant with her friends. She had stopped to listen and ended up recording 3 minutes of Lucy playing Claire de Lune. Her caption was simple. This homeless girl just played the most beautiful piano music I've ever heard. Someone needs to help her. Ashley's video was shared by her friends, who shared it with their friends, and so on. But what really made it explode was when it was picked up by a popular music blog that specialized in finding hidden talent. The blog's post was titled Street Musician or Secret Prodigy. This video will blow your mind, and it included Ashley's video along with a breakdown of just how difficult the pieces Lucy had played really were. From there, the story jumped to Twitter, where music teachers and professional pianists began sharing the video with amazed comments. A piano instructor from Boston wrote, I've been teaching for 20 years and I've never heard a student play Chopin with this level of emotional depth. This girl needs to be in conservatory now. The video reached the broader internet when a celebrity pianist named David Kim saw it on his Twitter feed. David had over 2 million followers and was known for discovering and promoting young talent. He shared the video with his own commentary. This is what real musical genius looks like. The technical skill is impressive, but the emotional intelligence behind this performance is extraordinary. We need to find this girl and get her the help she deserves. David's tweet was shared thousands of times within minutes. His followers included music industry professionals, wealthy patrons of the arts, and classical music lovers from around the world. Comments poured in from people expressing amazement at Lucy's talent and outrage at her circumstances. By midnight, just 4 hours after Lucy had first sat down at the piano, videos of her performance had been viewed more than 1 million times across all platforms. The story had been picked up by major news outlets, music magazines, and even some international media. Sears, Piano Girl was trending on Twitter, and Facebook groups dedicated to helping Lucy were forming by the hour. But Lucy didn't know any of this yet. She was still in Tony's office finishing her interview with Jennifer when Tony's phone started ringing constantly. He had to turn off the ringer because the calls wouldn't stop coming. Tony, what's going on out there? Jennifer asked when they heard commotion in the restaurant. Tony peeked out of his office and saw that his dining room had transformed into something he'd never seen before. Half the tables were still occupied by regular customers trying to finish their meals, but the other half had been taken over by people who had come specifically because of Lucy's story. Some were reporters, some were social workers, and some were just people who wanted to help. "I think you need to see this," Tony said, bringing his laptop into the office. He pulled up Ashley's video, which now had over 50,000 views and hundreds of comments. Lucy stared at the screen in shock. "That's me," she said quietly, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Lucy, this video has been shared thousands of times," Jennifer explained. "People all over the country are talking about you." Professor Williams was reading the comments on his phone. "Listen to this," he said. "A woman from Seattle writes, 'I'm a single mother and I know how hard it can be. This girl deserves every opportunity in the world.' A music teacher from Atlanta says, 'I want to help pay for her lessons.' Someone from New York is asking how to send money for food and housing." Lucy felt overwhelmed. "I don't understand. Why do all these people care about me? They don't even know me." "Because your music touched them," Jennifer said, "and because your story reminds them that talent and worth aren't determined by circumstances. You showed them something beautiful and now they want to give something back." Tony's landline started ringing again, and this time he answered it. "Giuseppe's restaurant." "Yes, she's here. I understand, but I can't just... Let me ask her." He covered the phone and looked at Lucy. "There's a woman on the phone who says she's a talent agent from Los Angeles. She wants to talk to you about opportunities." Lucy's eyes went wide. "A talent agent? Like for famous people?" "That's what she says. Do you want to talk to her?" Before Lucy could answer, Tony's cell phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then a flood of them started coming in so fast that he had to put the phone down. "The restaurant's social media accounts are exploding," Tony said, scrolling through the notifications. "People are tagging us in posts about Lucy. Some are thanking us for helping her. Others are asking if she'll play again tomorrow night." Jennifer was monitoring the story's spread on her own phone. "Lucy, this is moving faster than anything I've ever seen. Local news stations are sending crews here right now. National morning shows are asking for interviews. There's even interest from international media." Lucy felt dizzy. A few hours ago she had been invisible, just another homeless person that most people walked past without seeing. How suddenly the whole world seemed to know her name. "I don't know if I can handle all this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Professor Williams moved his chair closer to hers. "Lucy, I know this feels overwhelming, but this is the kind of opportunity that most musicians spend their entire lives dreaming about. Your talent was always extraordinary. Now the world knows it too. But what if I mess it up? What if people expect too much from me? Then you'll learn and grow just like any other artist," Professor Williams said gently. "The important thing is that you don't have to face this alone anymore." As if to prove his point, Tony's phone rang again. This time it was a representative from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, asking if Lucy would be interested in meeting with their education director about possible opportunities. Jennifer was taking notes as more calls came in. There were offers of free housing from families across the city, scholarship offers from music schools, and invitations to perform at charity events. A GoFundMe page that someone had started without Lucy's knowledge had already raised over $5,000 in just 2 hours. "There's something else," Jennifer said, looking at her phone. "A lot of people are sharing your story and talking about homelessness among young people. Your situation is making people realize how many kids are out there struggling with the same issues you've faced." Lucy thought about all the other homeless kids she had met over the past 8 months. Some were dealing with addiction, others had aged out of foster care like she had, and still others had run away from dangerous situations at home. "There are a lot of us," she said. "More than people think." "Maybe that's part of why your story is resonating so strongly," Professor Williams suggested. "You're giving a face and a voice to an issue that many people never think about." Tony knocked on the door again. "I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but there's someone here who says she's from the Department of Children and Family Services. She wants to make sure Lucy is safe and has somewhere to stay tonight." Lucy felt a familiar panic rise in her chest. DCFS meant social workers, and social workers meant being processed through a system that had already failed her once. Jennifer noticed her fear. "Lucy, this might actually be good news. If DCFS is getting involved because of all the media attention, They might be able to offer you options that weren't available before. Like what? Extended support services, better housing options, educational opportunities. Sometimes when cases get public attention, agencies find resources they didn't know they had. Professor Williams stood up. I think it's time to face the music, so to speak. But Lucy, remember that you're not powerless here. You have something valuable to offer the world, and that gives you leverage in these conversations. Lucy took a deep breath and looked around Tony's office one more time. It had been a safe haven for the past hour, but she knew she couldn't hide in here forever. Outside that door was a world that had suddenly become very interested in her life, for better or worse. Okay, she said, standing up. Let's see what happens next. As they prepared to leave the office, Lucy caught sight of herself in the small mirror Tony had on his wall. She still looked like the same homeless girl who had walked into the restaurant hours earlier, but somehow everything had changed. Her music had opened a door she never knew existed, and now she had to find the courage to walk through it. When Lucy stepped out of Tony's office, she was overwhelmed by the transformation that had taken place in the restaurant. What had been a quiet dining room a few hours earlier was now buzzing with activity that looked more like a news conference than a dinner service. Reporters with cameras clustered near the piano, social workers huddled around tablets showing the viral videos, and at least a dozen people she'd never seen before were all talking on their phones about her. The social worker from DCFS was a kind-looking woman in her 40s named Ms. Patterson. She approached Lucy with a warm smile and a calm demeanor that immediately put her at ease. Hi, Lucy, I'm here to make sure you're okay and to talk about some options that might help you get back on your feet. Am I in trouble? Lucy asked, the old fears creeping back in. Not at all, Ms. Patterson assured her. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Your story has gotten a lot of attention, and that attention has opened up some doors that weren't available to you before. Ms. Patterson led Lucy to a quiet corner table where they could talk privately. First things first, she said. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Lucy shook her head. I usually find somewhere. A doorway or a warm spot near a building vent. That's not happening tonight, Ms. Patterson said firmly but kindly. I've already arranged for you to stay at the Harbor House. It's a residential facility specifically for young people who are transitioning out of foster care. It's clean, safe, and you'll have your own room. Lucy had heard of places like Harbor House but had been told there were waiting lists months long. How is there suddenly space for me? Ms. Patterson smiled. Let's just say that when a story like yours gets this much attention, people start making phone calls and finding creative solutions. The director of Harbor House saw your video and immediately wanted to help. While they talked, Professor Williams was fielding phone calls from music schools across the country. He had given several reporters his contact information as someone who could speak to Lucy's musical abilities, and word had spread quickly through the classical music community. Lucy, he said, approaching their table with his phone still buzzing with notifications. I have some people who want to talk to you. Are you up for a few phone calls? The first call was from Dr. Richardson, the admissions director at the Manhattan School of Music in New York. She had seen the videos and wanted to discuss scholarship opportunities. Lucy held the phone nervously as Dr. Richardson explained that they rarely offered full scholarships to students who hadn't auditioned in person, but her performance had convinced them to make an exception. We'd like to arrange for you to come to New York next month for a formal audition, Dr. Richardson said. If it goes well, we're prepared to offer you a full scholarship that covers tuition, room, board, and even a small living stipend. Lucy could barely speak. The Manhattan School of Music was one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country. Students there went on to play with major orchestras and have international careers. You really want me to audition? Lucy, what I saw in those videos is the kind of raw talent we see maybe once every few years. Combined with your story and your obvious determination to overcome obstacles, you're exactly the kind of student we want in our program. The second call was even more surprising. It was from Rachel Torres, a successful concert pianist who had grown up in similar circumstances and now ran a foundation that helped young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. She had seen Lucy's story and wanted to offer immediate support. I know what it's like to have talent but no resources, Rachel said. My foundation can provide you with temporary housing, access to practice rooms and instruments, and connections to the best teachers in Chicago while you prepare for auditions. You don't have to wait for the system to help you. We can start helping you tomorrow." As Lucy finished the call, Jennifer approached with her laptop. "Lucy, you need to see this. The GoFundMe page that was started for you has raised over $20,000 in just 6 hours." Lucy stared at the screen in disbelief. The page was titled "Help Lucy Continue Her Musical Journey" and was filled with donations from people all over the world. Most were small amounts, $5, $10, or $20, but they came with heartfelt messages that brought tears to Lucy's eyes. A teacher from Ohio had donated $50 and written, "I see kids like Lucy every day who have incredible potential but no opportunities. This small donation can't solve the bigger problem, but maybe it can help one amazing girl achieve her dreams." A retired musician from Florida donated $100 with the message, "I spent 40 years playing piano professionally, and I've never heard anything as moving as Lucy's performance. Talent like this deserves to be nurtured." An entire high school music class in Texas had pooled their lunch money to donate $37, writing, "We're all learning piano and we know how hard those pieces are. Lucy is our hero." But it wasn't just individual donations. Several local businesses had contributed larger amounts after seeing the story on the news. A music store offered to provide Lucy with a keyboard and other supplies she might need. A clothing store wanted to donate a complete wardrobe. Even a local car dealership offered to provide transportation to auditions and lessons. Tony had been watching all of this unfold with amazement. His restaurant had accidentally become the center of a story that was touching people around the world. "Lucy," he said, approaching her table, "I have something to offer too. I'd like to give you a job here if you want it. Nothing too demanding. Maybe playing piano a few evenings a week, helping with events. It would give you some steady income while you pursue your music education." Lucy felt overwhelmed by the generosity pouring in from complete strangers. "I don't understand why everyone wants to help me. There are so many other kids in situations like mine." Professor Williams sat down beside her. "Lucy, you've given people something precious. You've reminded them that beauty and talent can emerge from the most difficult circumstances. When people see your videos, they don't just see a talented musician. They see hope. They see proof that investing in young people matters." Ms. Patterson had been quietly taking notes throughout all these conversations. "Lucy, I want to talk to you about something important. All of these opportunities are wonderful, but they also come with responsibilities. Suddenly having this much attention and support can be overwhelming. We want to make sure you have the right kind of guidance to handle it all." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're going to need help managing these opportunities, making good decisions about which ones to pursue, and protecting yourself from people who might try to take advantage of your situation. We can connect you with a social worker who specializes in helping young people navigate exactly these kinds of circumstances." Jennifer looked up from her laptop. "There's more, Lucy. I've been getting calls from talent managers, record labels, and even some television producers who want to feature your story. Some of these might be great opportunities, but others might not have your best interests at heart." Lucy felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. This was all happening so fast, and she didn't know how to tell the difference between genuine help and people who might want to exploit her story. Professor Williams seemed to sense her distress. "Lucy, here's what I suggest. Let's take this one step at a time. Tonight you go to Harbor House and get a good night's sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow we'll sit down with Miss Patterson and a few other people who have your best interests at heart, and we'll help you sort through all these opportunities carefully." "But what if people lose interest? What if this is my only chance?" "Real opportunities don't disappear overnight," Rachel Torres said, having overheard the conversation. "The people and organizations reaching out to you today will still be interested tomorrow and next week. Anyone who pressures you to make quick decisions without giving you time to think is probably not someone you want to work with anyway." As the evening wound down, Lucy found herself back at the piano where it had all started. The restaurant was quieter now, with most of the reporters and well-wishers having left for the night. She sat on the bench and played a few soft notes, hardly believing that these same keys had somehow changed her entire life in the span of a few hours. Ms. Patterson approached with a bag of personal items that some of the evening's visitors had put together for Lucy: toiletries, clean clothes, and a few books about music theory. "Are you ready to go see your room at Harbor House?" Lucy nodded, but before she left, she turned to Tony. "Thank you for letting me stay and eat dinner, and for not calling the police when I sat down at your piano." Tony smiled. Lucy, you've given my restaurant something money can't buy. People will be talking about tonight for years to come. You're welcome here anytime. As Lucy left Giuseppe's restaurant that night, she carried with her not just the promise of a warm bed and regular meals, but something much more valuable: hope. For the first time in 8 months, she could imagine a future that included music, education, and people who believed in her potential. The piano in the restaurant sat silent once again, but its keys seemed to shimmer with the memory of the music that had changed everything. 3 weeks later, Lucy stood in front of a full-length mirror in her room at Harbor House, adjusting the collar of a brand-new dress that had been donated by one of the many people who had reached out after seeing her story. She barely recognized herself. Her hair was clean and styled, her clothes fit properly, and for the first time in months, she looked like the teenager she actually was rather than someone much older who had been worn down by life on the streets. Today was the day she would audition at the Manhattan School of Music, and despite all the support she had received, she felt nervous butterflies dancing in her stomach. The past 3 weeks had been like living in a dream. Harbor House had provided her with not just a safe place to sleep, but also access to counseling, educational support, and most importantly, a practice room with a beautiful upright piano where she could play for hours without worrying about being told to leave. Rachel Torres had been true to her word, connecting Lucy with one of the best piano teachers in Chicago, Mrs. Kim, who had been working with her every day to prepare for the audition. Mrs. Kim was amazed at how quickly Lucy picked up new techniques and refined pieces she had learned years ago. "Your muscle memory is incredible," Mrs. Kim had said during one of their sessions. "Most students who take a break from playing for even a few months struggle to get back to their previous level. You're playing better than you were before." Lucy had also been working with a counselor at Harbor House named Mr. Rodriguez, who helped her process everything that had happened. The sudden shift from invisibility to having thousands of people know her story was emotionally overwhelming, and she needed help figuring out how to handle all the attention. "It's normal to feel guilty about receiving so much help," Mr. Rodriguez had explained during one of their sessions. "But remember, you're not taking these opportunities away from someone else. You're accepting help that you deserve, and you're going to use it to create something beautiful that will benefit others too." The media attention had continued, but in a more manageable way. Jennifer had followed up with a longer piece about Lucy's progress that aired on the national morning show, and several magazines had featured her story. But Lucy had learned to be selective about which interviews she accepted, focusing on opportunities that could help other young people in similar situations. One of the most meaningful developments had been the creation of the Lucy Foundation, started by some of the people who had been moved by her story. The foundation was dedicated to helping homeless youth develop their artistic talents, providing them with instruments, lessons, and performance opportunities. Lucy had been amazed to learn that she was the inspiration for an organization that was already helping other kids like her. "Your story opened people's eyes to how many talented young people are out there struggling," Ms. Patterson had explained. "The foundation has already identified 12 other homeless youth with exceptional artistic abilities and is providing them with support." As Lucy prepared to leave for the airport, she thought about how much her life had changed since that cold night at Giuseppe's restaurant. She now had a legal guardian, Mrs. Chen, her former elementary school music teacher, who had reached out after seeing the story and offered to provide Lucy with a stable home environment. Mrs. Chen had fought through months of paperwork and legal proceedings to become Lucy's guardian, motivated by her belief that every child deserved a chance to pursue their dreams. The apartment Lucy now called home was small but warm, with a piano in the living room and photos of her and her mother displayed on the mantel. Mrs. Chen had even managed to track down some of Lucy's mother's belongings that had been stored by a family friend, including her mother's favorite music books and the locket Lucy thought she had lost forever. Harbor House had also connected Lucy with other teenagers who had aged out of foster care, and she had formed friendships with several young people who understood her experiences in ways that others couldn't. They had created an informal support group that met weekly to share challenges and celebrate successes. One of her new friends, Alex, had been homeless for 2 years and was an incredibly talented artist. Through the connections Lucy had made, Alex had been introduced to an art teacher who was helping him prepare a portfolio for college applications. Another friend, Maria, was a gifted writer who was now getting help applying for scholarships to study journalism. "It's like Lucy opened a door for all of us," Maria had said during one of their group meetings. "People are paying attention to homeless youth in a way they never did before." The flight to New York was Lucy's first time on an airplane, and despite her nervousness about the audition, she couldn't help but be excited about the adventure. Professor Williams had insisted on accompanying her, both to provide moral support and to help her navigate the process. Rachel Torres had also flown in from Los Angeles to be there for the audition. "Remember," Professor Williams said as they settled into their seats, "you've already accomplished something extraordinary just by getting to this point. The audition is just the next step in a journey that's already been incredible." Lucy nodded, but her mind was focused on the pieces she would perform. She had chosen to play the same Chopin nocturne that had started everything at Giuseppe's, along with a Bach invention and a more contemporary piece by a living composer. Mrs. Kim had helped her select music that would showcase both her technical skills and her emotional depth. The most important thing, Mrs. Kim had reminded her during their final lesson, is to play with the same honesty and passion that you showed that night at the restaurant. That's what made people fall in love with your music in the first place. When they arrived at the Manhattan School of Music, Lucy was struck by how different it felt from any school she had ever visited. Students walked the halls carrying instrument cases, and the sound of practicing drifted from dozens of rooms. She could hear piano, violin, cello, and instruments she couldn't even identify, all blending together into a symphony of learning and creativity. Dr. Richardson met them in the lobby, and Lucy was surprised by how warm and approachable she was. In Lucy's mind, the admissions director of such a prestigious school would be intimidating, but Dr. Richardson made her feel immediately welcome. "We're so excited to finally meet you in person," Dr. Richardson said, as she led them to the audition room. "I have to tell you, your videos have been shared among our faculty more than any audition recording we've ever received. Everyone is curious to hear you play live." The audition room was beautiful, with high ceilings, excellent acoustics, and a magnificent grand piano that gleamed under the soft lighting. A panel of 3 faculty members sat at a table with notepads and warm smiles, ready to listen. Lucy sat at the piano bench and took a deep breath. For a moment she thought about her mother, who had always believed that music could open doors to places Lucy had never imagined. She thought about the cold night when she had walked into Giuseppe's restaurant with nothing but $5 and a desperate hope for something warm to eat. She thought about all the people who had believed in her and invested in her future. Then she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The Chopin flowed from the piano like water, each note perfectly placed but full of emotion. The faculty members looked up from their notepads almost immediately, drawn into the music just as the restaurant customers had been weeks earlier. Lucy felt the familiar joy of being completely connected to the instrument, of expressing things that couldn't be said with words. When she finished the final piece, the room was silent for a moment. Then Dr. Richardson smiled and said, "Lucy, I think we've heard everything we need to hear. Welcome to the Manhattan School of Music." Lucy felt tears of joy streaming down her face as Professor Williams and Rachel Torres stood up to applaud. She had done it. Through all the challenges and setbacks, through months of having nothing but her talent and her determination, she had found her way to exactly where she belonged. That evening, as they celebrated at a restaurant in Manhattan, Lucy called Mrs. Chen to share the good news. "I'm so proud of you," Mrs. Chen said, her voice full of emotion. "Your mother would be so proud too." Lucy looked out at the lights of New York City, thinking about the future that now lay ahead of her. She would study with world-class teachers, perform on stages she had only dreamed of, and most importantly, use her music to continue helping other young people who were struggling the way she had struggled. The girl who had been invisible on the streets of Chicago was invisible no more. She had found her voice, her home, and her purpose one note at a time,